Okay, we're going to continue on with our look at the one another's. And this is all part of the series that we've been looking at in the New Testament is how did the New Testament church do church? So first question here, and this is the introduction. It's actually kind of a review. Is the question is why did the early church meet together? Just basic question. Why did they do this? Why did they get together like they did? And what was the primary purpose of their gatherings? What's the essential thing that they were gathering for? So last week we looked at this is I think is really significant. What was the common pattern of how people related back there in the first century, in the ancient times? What was the common pattern for how people related to their particular deity, their particular god or goddess? This would include Jewish worship and the pagan worship. How did they relate to that particular deity? And that's what we would refer to today. We would call it's worship. That's what we refer to as worship. It's how do you relate to God? And so we saw three common patterns throughout the ancient world, including the Jewish faith. And the first was that worship meant going to a sacred building, going to a sacred space, generally called a temple, a special place that you went to worship your God, and often it meant that was where the deity resided. And so in Jerusalem, there was the temple, and they had the Holy of Holies where God was believed to reside. Yeah, and that was the same in all the pagan religions. So that was a common thing. Second common thing was it meant having some kind of worship take place. That could be animal worship. It could be bringing portions of your crops or money. And some pagan worship that could mean humans. So that was a common element in ancient worship. Third, a common element was that there was a human mediator that acted as a go-between for the people and their particular deity. When we would refer to that person, they referred to those people generally as a priest or a priestess. So those were the three. If you were going to say, we're going to worship, that's what would come to their mind. They wouldn't think of a small group like us gathering together to sing songs and love on one another. That didn't exist as a model for worship. That was alien. That was not part of the culture back then. They didn't view that. We today, we take that as a common thing, that I as an individual can just go worship all by myself, or a small group can get together and just worship together, and we that's fine. But back then, that wasn't what people would have called worship. That model that we look at, what we do now, and what is seen in the New Testament, was a new thing that didn't exist until Jesus came along. So when we look at the early church gatherings there in the New Testament, in the book of Acts, we see throughout the epistles, especially in 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians, quite a bit of actual teaching about their gatherings. We can see that what would be a parallel to us today, I don't want to sound heretical, but it would not be the pattern that we see in in churches so much. It would be more what we would see in like Alcoholics Anonymous get-togethers. They were support groups, smaller groups that got together to support one another. We see that, and we have not just Alcoholics Anonymous, but grief groups. People, all kinds of different people going through divorce. There's just all kinds of support groups, and we know what that looks like. The need for a temple or a building or a priest or a sacrifice, we find out in the New Testament, had been done away with in Christ. We no longer need a physical building, a sacred, holy building, because we, the church, the believers, were and are the building. We are the flesh and blood building that God indwells. He dwells in us, not in a man-made building. So that was taken away in Christ. The need for an individual priest, a mediator between people and God, was done away with, because Jesus is our mediator, and he includes us and calls us what? We are a royal priesthood. We are each one individual priest to serve God. So that was done away with. The third thing was the need for a sacrifice. Well, Jesus is described as the once for all time sacrifice. No longer is a sacrifice needed. And so those three common elements that any person living back in those days, if you said you're going to worship, that those would immediately come into their minds, something of those things. Now, we're looking at this group of new Christians, and they're not doing any of those things. They are very countercultural in that sense, and probably very suspect, because they didn't fit the cultural norm and the pattern. Yeah, and that's why and one reason why they needed to be supporting one another is because they were often at high risk of persecution in one way or another from where they lived. So the early church was, what they did, they were calling people to leave their temples, leave their priests, leave the sacrifices behind, and come and be part of their new kingdom movement. Radical, really radical, very countercultural. And so, as I said, this would be something that would make them very highly suspect and actually a threat to the social order of things. And it continues today. I mean, it continues today in countries that see the church, Christians, as a threat. And so it was really important that they banded together to care for one another, to support one another, to encourage one another, because all those old ways of worship, those support systems that they had grown up with, and this is what they were accustomed to, those had passed away. And guess what? All things became new, right? So they desperately needed to meet with one another to learn to adjust to this new kingdom way of relating to God, which is what we would label as worship. But what is really surprising is that when you go through the New Testament, the word worship is not the word that is really used in the New Testament to describe They're gatherings. You won't find the term worship service, worship leader. You won't find those in there. The term that is used again and again is the word. What's the word? We talked about it. What is the primary word? This is why I'm reviewing, because you guys don't remember. Edification. Edification, which means to build up. It comes from the Greek word house and to build. So it's building up. Why? Because we are the living stones, right? We're the building that's being built up. And so the gathering, and again, this is kind of a paradigm shift for me in some ways, that we don't gather primarily to worship as we understand that word today, but we are to gather primarily to edify one another, to build up one another. It includes worship. It includes all of the elements that we would associate with worship, praying, singing, those things, offerings. But the overall term is to edify, edification, to build up one another. And how did they do this? Well, if we looked at this last week, not last week, the week before, the most used term to describe what they did is the word, think of Valentine's Day. I hear you whispering it. Say it loud, man. I mean, that's the word. Love. Love, love. You know, they came together to love one another. And when you see that there's like 50 plus of these one another verses throughout the New Testament, describing different things. And I suggested that love is the overarching word. And all of these others are aspects of how to love one another. And we're going through and looking at different ones. And so today, what I want to look at are what I'm calling acts of love. These are more external expressions of love. First things we looked at were more of an attitude, honoring one another, those kinds of things. And so this is sort of the key verse for all of this, these one another's, and it's 1 Corinthians 14:26. And remember, the Corinthians had a whole lot of problems. I mean, they had a lot of division going on, and they were misusing their spiritual gifts, kind of to wanting to show their spiritual superiority, things like that. And Paul has to really address all those issues, and he really does it there in 1 Corinthians 12 and 13 and 14 specifically, but some of the others. And so you come to chapter 14 of 1 Corinthians in verse 26, and this is a good summary verse. It kind of describes what their gatherings look like. He says, "What then shall we say, brothers and sisters? When you come together, when we meet, come together, each of you has a hymn or a word of instruction, a revelation, a tongue, or an interpretation." I believe that Paul could have gone on and listed some other things too. But he says, everything, whatever you do, must be done so that the church may be built up. And that's that word, edify. So that's the key for everything must be done for edification when we come together to meet. And I could go, that verse is, each one of you. So that's like, nobody gets to just sit, hide out, it's each one. And so that's why I'm encouraging, you guys, when you come, through the week, have your antennas up. How is God working? How's God showing to you, speaking to you through a verse, encouraging one, and bring that, be intentionally thinking about this time together, because that's what we're called to do. Look, I do this. I mean, that, you guys are paying me to do this, to go and study the Bible and come and bring this stuff to you. But we're all called to edify one another, to share the things that God's doing in our lives and how it's going to encourage somebody. It's somebody on Friday had coffee with somebody, and he said, I want to show you something. And he pulled out a 3x5 card that he'd been carrying around with him for more than a decade. And I don't know if you guys recall, but one of the things that the elders did down at EV Free Church on Wednesday mornings, we would have get together for prayer, was we were to write a note of encouragement to somebody. And they mailed them out on these 3x5 cards. And he pulls it out, and here's a note of encouragement that I had written to him over a decade ago, and he's still got it. And that's the kind of, just not a big thing, but a small thing can really pierce somebody's heart, where somebody's at, because we don't know where everybody's at and what God is wanting to teach. So that's why one of the things that come out of this series is that we would grow in that, where I know we come and we share prayer requests, and because we're getting old and we got old friends and everything, we got all kinds of physical things to pray about, but there's so much more, and I know we do it. We're open and honest, and this is a safe place, but it's a way to just to share what God is doing. What was the one thing we used to do? We had I Spy. We used to do an I Spy early on at E-Free, called it I Spy. And you were supposed to be like, what's God doing? You're I Spy. I Spy God did this or whatever. And then we would share those things. So that's a little rabbit trail there a bit. But that's what we do when we come. That's how we build up one another. So the first thing of these acts of love, and we've talked about this one already, so I won't spend a lot of time on this. One of the very practical, and it's so amazing how these things are not like extraordinary feats of love that you have to perform. Like these love songs. Oh, I would cross the burning desert, for you. I would swim the oceans, blah blah. No, you wouldn't. Come on, that's I wrote a song like that, it's saying, if you don't mind, I'm not going to do those things, but I still love you.
There's a term for that.
So these are just basic things. Greet and accept one another. That word's accept, you could put in there welcome one another. Romans 16:16. Greet one another with a holy kiss. And we talked about that in some cultures today, we still do that. They peck on the cheeks. But it's that human touch. It's that intimate, to greet, just to greet someone, to acknowledge them and what that signifies and what that means and what that communicates, that you're saying, you're important. You're important enough for me to make contact, to greet you, and to welcome one another. You could see this was practiced back then. Paul writes in Romans 15:7, he says, accept one another, just as Christ also accepted us to the glory of God. And the last part of that first verse, 16:16, says, all the churches of Christ send greetings. And when you go through the letters, you see how Paul practiced this. The end of Romans, it's incredible. The number of names of people that he knew personally, he's sending greetings to these people in Rome, and he's never been to Rome. It's amazing. And that's throughout all of the letters, you see that. So that's just a very simple thing, and I'm learning that, to give a hug, give a hug. And some people are more huggy and some people aren't so huggy, but use your wisdom and discretion. But second, and it just goes right along with it, kind of expands on that. Show hospitality to one another. 1 Peter 4:9. Be hospitable to one another without complaint. Well, we have role models for hospitality here like nobody. I mean, these guys here every week now for 10 years. Can you imagine that? For 10 years. You know, it's wear and tear we put on this their home, but that's hospitality. You know, it's to welcome people into your space, not to shelter yourself away, but to have that open heart to others, to be hospitable, and to do it. It's interesting. He says without complaint. Third thing is to bear one another's burdens, to comfort one another, to care for one another. I kind of put those all together because they all kind of go together. Bear burdens, comfort one another, care for one another. Galatians 6:2, bear one another's burdens. And when you do that, listen to what he says. He says, thereby fulfill the law of Christ. When you bear one another, because that's loving one another. And when you love one another, you're fulfilling the law. And here he's reminded that bearing one another's is part of that. 2 Corinthians, I forgot to put the verse in there. Did I put it on the
13:11,
Third-
next line.
yeah. God who comforts us in all our affliction. Oh, this is actually in chapter 1. So that we will be able to comfort those who are in any affliction with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. That verse answers the question, why do bad things happen to Christians? It's so that we will be able to share with others what God has done for us in our affliction, in our suffering, in our trials. So it's always not about us, it's always about sharing, being a channel for Christ's love to channel through to others, God's comfort. And we're to do that to one another, for one another. 1 Corinthians 12:25, so that there may be no division in the body, but that the members may have the same care for one another. So that caring, that comforting, that bearing one another's burdens, that's what we do when we come together. We do it in prayer, but we also do it in a whole lot of other ways. These guys bared our burdens in a just extraordinary way. All of you did, which was one of the most powerful witnesses of God's love that I've ever experienced. And that's what we do. That's what Christians are called to do. And then a fourth act of love, we pray for one another. Well, pray for one another. James 5:16, confess your sins to one another and pray for one another so that you may be healed. Praying for one another. I think we've been doing that, right? So
We did today.
it was very interesting as I went through this because part of my mind was thinking, okay, are we doing this? And I'm just checking them off. Yep, check. A fifth thing is that we instruct, we teach, we admonish one another. Admonish, well, that's maybe not always the fun one, but admonish one another. Romans 15:14. And concerning you, my brethren, I myself also am convinced that you yourselves are full of goodness, filled with all knowledge, and able also to admonish one another. Colossians 3:16. Let the word of Christ richly dwell within you with all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another. How? Well, this is very interesting. With psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with thankfulness in your hearts to God. Really? Did you know that? When we're singing, we are actually teaching. We are speaking to one another. Let's see. Yeah. We're admonishing, we're teaching one another. Now, the sixth one piggybacks on that, and we are to sing to one another and to the Lord. Ephesians 5:19 says, speaking to one another, just like very similar to Colossians, speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody with your heart to the Lord. And then again, Colossians 3:16, let the word of Christ richly dwell within you, with all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another with psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with thankfulness in your hearts to God. So do you see something there? What we call worship, you would call that a worship verse, right? That's talking about worship. But do you see that the worship here goes in two directions? It goes this way, horizontal, and it goes vertical. It's in both of those are in that verse. Sing to one another, and as we sing to one another, we're singing to the Lord. Because our mindset is often we're singing just to the Lord. But this is telling us, no, we're singing to the Lord, and we're at the same time, we're singing. And in that singing, through the messages of these songs, we're teaching, we're admonishing one another. Have you ever had that experience?
Edification.
Yeah, and it's an edification. It's all about. But have you ever had that experience when a particular song, just kind of hits you right between the eyes, and it's like, whoa. Yeah, I've had that where listening to a song, that one, I forget what right off the top of my head, but where I had to pull the car over to the side of the road and stop, because it's just
God.
well, there's one. I mean, that's just so profound. So just some very practical things. And again, I'm checking that. Well, we're doing that. We're doing that. We're doing that. But all of it is we grow in that. It gets deeper. It gets richer. And we get strengthened in our relationship to one another, built up in the Lord, more equipped to share the Lord with others out in the world. So that's what the early church did. That's why they gathered. That's why people met together, to edify and build up one another in the Lord. It's never an either or. That's so important. It's never an either or. It's never just for the Lord. It's never just for others. It's for both. So that's kind of the main takeaway from this message, is that to recognize that worship is expressed both vertically towards God and horizontally toward people simultaneously. Read 1 John 4:20 through 21. It tells us that if someone says, I love God, and hates his brother, he is a liar. For the one who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. And this commandment we have from him, that the one who loves God should also love his brother. So it's always vertical and horizontal. The idea of, in the medieval times, when the monks, went off and lived in caves to remove themselves from wicked society, that was completely unfounded, according to what John is saying here. That's why we're in this world. We are the light of the world, so that, Jesus says, so that men may see your good works and what? Glorify our Father in heaven. Yeah, that's what it's all about. So that's what I have for today. And hopefully that was helpful.